February 11, 1979, Maui, Hawaii. The morning was clear enough to tempt anyone onto the water. 5 young men, Scott Moorman, Peter Hanchett, Ralph Maliakini, Scott Schultz, and Benjamin Kalama, took a small 17-foot aluminum fishing boat called the Sarah Joe out from Hana Bay. The boat was not built for deep ocean. It was a day boat, the kind you take out for a few hours close to shore and bring back before dinner. They were in their 20s, experienced enough with the water. The sea that morning gave no warning. They had no radio capable of reaching the Coast Guard. They had fishing gear, a small outboard motor, and each other. What happened next would not be discovered for 9 years. And when it was, the discovery would raise more questions than it answered.
Hours after the Sarah Joe left Hana Bay, a storm rolled in from the northwest. It came fast, the kind of squall that builds quickly in the open Pacific and hits before anyone on shore can issue a warning. By the time anyone noticed the 5 men had not returned, the storm had already passed. The sea was calm again. The boat was gone. The U.S. Coast Guard launched one of the largest air and sea searches in Hawaiian history up to that point. Aircraft covered thousands of square miles. Ships worked the channels between the islands. Divers checked the waters near Hana Bay.
Nothing. No wreckage. No life jackets. No debris field. No bodies.
After several days, the search was called off. 5 men had walked down to the water on a clear February morning, climbed into a small aluminum boat, and vanished without a trace. Their families were left with no answers, no funerals, no certainty of any kind. The case went cold. The years passed. And then, 9 years later, everything changed, though not in the way anyone could have predicted. In September 1988, a marine biologist named John Naughton was conducting field research for NOAA on Taongi Atoll, a tiny, uninhabited ring of coral and sand in the Marshall Islands. Taongi sits roughly 2,300 miles from Maui. There is no fresh water on the atoll, no permanent residents, no regular boat traffic. It is one of the most remote and least visited places in the entire Pacific Ocean. Naughton and his team were walking the atoll's shoreline when they found the wreckage of a small boat. The hull was aluminum, partially buried in sand and vegetation. The outboard motor was still attached, corroded and frozen with age. Naughton checked the registration numbers on the hull. The boat was the Sarah Joe. It had traveled, or been carried, approximately 2,300 miles from where it disappeared, across open ocean, without a crew, without a working motor. But the boat was not the most disturbing thing Naughton found on that atoll. A short distance from the wreck, someone had dug a shallow grave in the coral sand. The grave was marked with a small cairn, a deliberate arrangement of coral stones placed on top. Inside the grave were human bones, a partial skeleton. Forensic analysis later confirmed the remains belonged to Scott Moorman, one of the 5 men who had left Maui on February 11, 1979. The grave was shallow, hand-dug into sandy coral ground. No shovel, no tools recovered nearby. The coral stones on top had been placed deliberately. This was not the result of wind or water. Someone had arranged them, one by one, as a marker. Scott Moorman's bones were partial, not a complete skeleton. Some remains were missing, consistent with exposure animal disturbance, or the passage of years. The other 4 men, Peter Hanchett, Ralph Maliakini, Scott Schultz, and Benjamin Kalama, were not on the atoll. No trace of them anywhere on the island. No supplies were found near the wreck. No food containers, no water jugs, no fishing equipment in any usable state. The outboard motor showed no signs of recent use. The boat had not arrived under its own power. The question that immediately consumed investigators was this: who buried Scott Moorman? Taiongi Atoll had no permanent population. U.S. Coast Guard records showed no vessel had reported passing through that area during the relevant years. No aircraft had logged a landing. The coral stone cairn was not accidental. It was not natural. Someone, a person with hands and intention, had dug that grave and marked it. That person, whoever they were, left no other trace of their presence on the island. The most straightforward theory is that at least some of the 5 men survived the storm and reached Taiongi Atoll. A Pacific current known as the North Equatorial Current runs roughly east to west across the region. A drifting boat, engine dead, crew aboard or not, could theoretically be carried westward over weeks or months, eventually reaching the Marshall Islands. If that theory is correct, then Scott Moorman survived the storm. He may have survived days or weeks adrift. He may have reached the atoll alive, only to die there from exposure, dehydration, or injury. And one of the other 4 men, still unidentified, buried him, arranged the coral stones, and then left or died or disappeared into the ocean. The second theory is darker, that Moorman died on the boat during the drift, and a passing vessel, a fishing boat, a private yacht, found the wreck at sea or on the atoll, buried the body out of basic human decency, and never reported it. Maritime law requires the reporting of found human remains. No such report was ever filed. A third possibility: a fisherman from a remote island community found Moorman's body, performed a burial according to their own customs, and had no contact with any authority that would have recorded the event. No one has ever come forward. No vessel has ever been identified. 4 men are still missing: Peter Hanchett, Ralph Maliakini, Scott Schultz, Benjamin Kalama. No remains, no wreckage, no final account of any kind. The Sarah Jo traveled 2,300 miles. That is not in dispute. The hull numbers confirmed it. Scott Moorman was buried by someone. That is also not in dispute. The grave was deliberate. But who made that grave has never been determined. In over 3 decades since Naughton's discovery, no one has claimed responsibility, no vessel has been identified, and no surviving witness has come forward. The U.S. Coast Guard closed the case. The families received partial answers: a grave, a name, a set of bones on a coral atoll 2,300 miles from home. They never learned who put those coral stones in place, and they never learned what happened to the other 4. A grave on an uninhabited atoll, a boat that crossed 2,300 miles of open ocean without a crew, and a question: who buried him? That has never been answered. But Sarah Jo's mystery is at least grounded in the physical world. The wreck was real. The bones were real. What came next would be harder to hold on to. A ship that had been missing for 23 years and came back. 1890.
The age of sail was not yet fully over. British merchant ships still worked the long routes between New Zealand and England, weeks at sea, carrying wool, frozen mutton, and passengers across the Southern Ocean.
The Marlborough was one of these ships, an iron-hulled sailing vessel built for endurance. She carried a crew of 33 and a small number of passengers, loaded a cargo of frozen mutton in New Zealand, and set course for England. The route took her south, below the roaring 40s, one of the most brutal stretches of ocean in the world. Gale-force winds, massive swells, ice. The Southern Ocean does not forgive mistakes. The Marlborough was not an inexperienced ship on an unfamiliar route. She had made the crossing before. She would not make it again. She disappeared somewhere on that southward arc, and the shipping registers simply recorded her as missing. No distress signal, no wreckage, no survivor. Lloyd's of London entered the Marlborough in their missing vessels register in 1890. Standard procedure. Ships were lost at sea with some regularity in that era. The Southern Ocean claimed several every year. The assumption was straightforward. The ship had encountered a storm too powerful to survive. The Southern Ocean had broken her. The sea had taken her down, and nothing would ever be found. It was a reasonable assumption. Hundreds of ships had vanished on that route over the decades. Most were never seen again.
33 crew members and their passengers were recorded as lost. Their families grieved. The maritime world moved on.
23 years passed. In 1913, a ship passing through the waters near Tierra del Fuego, the rocky, storm-battered tip of South America, gateway to the Drake Passage, reported something extraordinary. They had found the Marlborough, still floating, still intact, still there. According to the account, the passing vessel spotted a ship drifting in the waters near Tierra del Fuego. Her sails were in rags, shredded and hanging from the masts, but still attached. The hull was green with algae and marine growth. 23 years of drift had left their mark on every surface. A boarding party was sent over. What they found on the deck and in the cabins has been described in various accounts with slight differences, but the core detail remains consistent across all of them. There were skeletons. Human skeletons scattered across the deck and in the crew quarters, still clothed in the rotted remnants of their uniforms, some at their posts, some in their bunks. The Marlborough had not sunk. The iron hull had held. For 23 years, the ship had drifted through some of the most violent waters on the planet, around Cape Horn, through the Drake Passage, in the shadow of Tierra del Fuego, carrying her dead crew with her. The ship that Lloyd's had entered as lost in 1890 had been at sea the entire time. 23 years, 33 skeletons, and not a single explanation for why the crew had died. The accounts of the discovery describe no signs of catastrophic structural failure. The hull was intact. The ship had not been holed. She had not struck a reef. There was no evidence of fire, no evidence of an explosion, no evidence of violence among the crew. The skeletons were simply there, in place, as if the crew had died suddenly and simultaneously, with no time to react, no time to reach the lifeboats, no time to send a distress signal. What could kill 33 people at once, leave the ship perfectly intact, and then allow that ship to drift for 23 years without sinking. A toxic gas from the frozen cargo. The mutton had been refrigerated. Spoilage of that magnitude, releasing lethal gases in a sealed hold, could theoretically incapacitate an entire crew in hours.
A rapid outbreak of disease, cholera, typhus, moving through the ship faster than anyone could respond. A rogue wave that swept the decks clean of anyone who survived, leaving only those already dead below.
None of these theories has ever been confirmed. The ship, as described, left no physical evidence that pointed clearly to any one cause.
Here, the story becomes complicated because the primary documentation for this discovery is thin.
The Marlborough's disappearance in 1890 is confirmed. Lloyd's records are clear. The ship was real, the crew was real, and the cargo of frozen mutton was real.
But the 1913 discovery account relies on secondary sources, newspaper reports, and maritime folklore collections published years after the fact. The boarding party's report, if it ever existed as a formal document, has not been located in any national archive.
Rupert Gould, who compiled unusual maritime cases in the 1920s, included the Marlborough story, but noted that documentation was uncertain.
This raises a question the Sarah Jo does not. Did the discovery of the Marlborough actually happen as described? Or did a genuine disappearance, a ship truly lost in 1890, accumulate a ghost story over the following decades?
What is certain, the Marlborough vanished. What is uncertain, whether she was ever found, and what, if anything, was aboard when she was. The Southern Ocean has swallowed ships without a trace for centuries. It is the most hostile stretch of open water on the planet. No coastline for thousands of miles, winds that circle the globe uninterrupted, waves that can reach the height of a 6-story building. If the Marlborough sank there, no wreckage would have reached shore. The currents run the wrong way. The depths are extreme. But if the Marlborough did not sink, if the iron hull held for 23 years, then what killed 33 people quickly enough that not one of them reached the radio, the lifeboats, or the signal flares? The Lloyd's Register still shows her as missing. No salvage claim was ever filed for the ship. No formal discovery was ever recorded by any maritime authority. The Marlborough remains, officially, lost at sea.
A ship full of skeletons, drifting for 23 years through waters no one fully controls. A grave on an atoll, dug by hands no one has identified. Both mysteries involve the dead, and both leave the living with nothing concrete enough to close the case. The next story is different. No bodies, no wreck, just a city, 5,000 years old, hiding in 3 meters of water where anyone could have found it.
Off the southern coast of Greece, near the village of Elefonisos in Laconia, the water is shallow and clear. On a calm day, you can see the seafloor from a boat. For thousands of years, local fishermen worked these waters. They dropped anchors. They dove for sea urchins and sponges. They knew every rock, every sandbar, every feature of the bottom. None of them recognized what was directly beneath them. In 1967, a British oceanographer named Nicholas Fleming was snorkeling in roughly 3 to 4 meters of water near the Laconian coast. He looked down and saw something that should not have been there. Streets, laid out in a grid.
Walls, standing walls, running parallel and perpendicular, forming the outlines of buildings.
Courtyards, doorways, the clear geometric shapes of human construction, covering an area of roughly 9 acres on the seafloor.
Fleming had stumbled onto an entire submerged city, intact, identifiable, and lying in water shallow enough that a child could swim to the bottom and touch the walls.
It had been there, undisturbed, for approximately 5,000 years.
Fleming published a preliminary report in 1968. The site was named Pavlopetri, after a small nearby island.
Initial dating placed the city in the Bronze Age, roughly 3000 BC, predating the Minoan civilization of Crete and contemporary with some of the earliest known European urban settlements. But the academic world moved slowly. For 4 decades, Pavlopetri received occasional attention, but no sustained excavation. The site was noted, catalogued, and largely left alone. Then, in 2009, a team from the University of Nottingham, led by Dr. John Henderson, returned with modern survey equipment. They conducted a full 3-dimensional sonar mapping of the entire site, the most comprehensive survey of an underwater Bronze Age city ever attempted. What emerged from the data was extraordinary in its completeness. 15 distinct buildings, a central street running through the city, at least 37 smaller rooms, courtyards with defined boundaries, storage vessels still in place, a complex water management system, channels cut into the rock to direct flow.
This was not a fishing village. This was a town, planned, built, and inhabited.
Pavlopetri would have been a coastal trading hub. It sits at the southern tip of the Peloponnese, at a natural harbor. Ships moving between Crete, the Aegean Islands, and the Greek mainland would have passed directly by it.
The city was occupied for approximately 2,000 years, from roughly 3000 BC to around 1100 BC, when it was abandoned or destroyed. Pottery recovered from the site spans multiple periods. Some of it dates to the early Bronze Age. Some matches the style of Mycenaean Greece, the civilization that gave rise to the legends of Troy and Agamemnon. There are graves within the city boundaries, burials conducted on land that are now 3 meters underwater. At some point, and this is the question that drives the ongoing research, Pavlopetri went below the surface. The sea level in the Mediterranean has risen approximately 2 to 4 meters since 3000 BC. Some of that rise was gradual, driven by the global warming that followed the last ice age. Some of it was sudden, seismic events, earthquakes, tsunamis that have reshaped the Greek coastline repeatedly over millennia.
Pavlopetri could have been swallowed gradually, or it could have been lost in a day.
3 main theories explain how Pavlopetri went underwater. Each is supported by different types of evidence. None has been definitively proven.
The first theory is gradual submergence, sea level rise over centuries slowly inundating the lower parts of the city, eventually covering it entirely. The abandonment of the site around 1100 BC coincides with the collapse of Mycenaean civilization across the eastern Mediterranean. The inhabitants may have simply left, and the sea took what remained. The second theory is seismic subsidence. The Laconian coastline sits in one of the most tectonically active regions of Europe. Repeated earthquakes over millennia have caused sections of the Greek coast to drop, sometimes by meters, sometimes over decades, sometimes in a single event.
The third theory, supported by some of the site's architectural damage, is a tsunami. A large underwater earthquake off the Greek coast could have generated a wave capable of destroying a coastal city and burying it under sediment in a matter of hours.
The Nottingham team found evidence of post-abandonment structural collapse, walls that fell inward, not from water pressure, but from something that struck them from above or from the side. The pattern is consistent with a wave, but it is not conclusive.
The most remarkable thing about Pavlopetri is not that it sank. Cities have been lost to the sea throughout human history. It is one of the oldest stories we have.
The remarkable thing is how long it went unrecognized.
The city lies in 3 to 4 meters of water, in the clearest sea in Europe, on a stretch of coastline that has been continuously inhabited since ancient times. Greek and Roman sailors navigated these waters. Byzantine fishermen worked them. Ottoman ships passed through. Modern tourists have swum above the site without knowing it was there.
The walls of Pavlopetri are visible from the surface on a calm day. The stone outlines of buildings can be seen from a boat. They look, at a casual glance, like natural rock formations, which is exactly why no one identified them for 5 millennia.
Nicholas Fleming found the city not because he was looking for it. He found it because he happened to be snorkeling in the right place and recognized what he was looking at.
5,000 years of invisibility. Not because the city was buried or hidden, because the human eye had grown accustomed to looking past it.
What else is hiding in 3 meters of water, in plain sight on a coastline someone has worked every day for 1,000 years?
Pavlopetri has no name from its own time. The people who built it, who traded from its harbor, who buried their dead within its walls, they left no written record that has survived.
Linear B tablets, the earliest form of written Greek used by Mycenaean civilization, have been found at sites across southern Greece. None have been recovered from Pavlopetri. The seafloor conditions may have destroyed them, or the city may have predated their use.
We know the city existed for roughly 2,000 years. We know it was active during a period of intense trade and cultural exchange across the eastern Mediterranean. We know it was abandoned or destroyed around 1100 BC, the same era that saw the collapse of the Hittite Empire, the sacking of Troy, and the end of Mycenaean Greece. We do not know what the people who lived there called themselves. We do not know what language they spoke in its earlier phases. We do not know with certainty what finally put it underwater. The city is there, clear, mappable, touchable in 3 meters of water. And it remains, in the most fundamental sense, completely unknown. A city hiding in plain sight for 5,000 years, visible from the surface, never recognized. The ocean took it slowly, or perhaps in a single catastrophic day, and simply waited. The final story in this group involves no ocean at all. It is a mountain lake, 5,000 meters above sea level, in the Himalayas. And it holds hundreds of human skeletons, all bearing the same wound on the same part of the skull. In the Himalayan region of Uttarakhand, India, at an elevation of 5,029 meters above sea level, there is a small glacial lake called Roopkund. The lake is tiny, roughly 40 meters across. It sits in a rocky bowl beneath the peak of Trishul, one of the Himalayan massifs.
For most of the year, it is frozen solid, covered in ice and snow, unreachable by any practical route.
In late summer, when the ice partially melts, the lake becomes shallow, sometimes no more than a meter or two deep.
In 1942, a British forest ranger named Hari Kishan Madwal reached the lake during a survey and made a discovery that would eventually attract scientists, archaeologists, and researchers from institutions on 3 continents.
The lake was full of human skeletons.
Not a few. Hundreds, scattered around the lake's edges, half submerged in the ice and water, some still partially clothed in the remnants of leather and wool.
At first glance, the ranger thought he had found a recent mass casualty site, perhaps soldiers lost in the war, perhaps a caravan destroyed by an avalanche.
He was right about the avalanche part, wrong about everything else.
British military investigators examined the site in 1942. They quickly ruled out a World War II connection. The equipment and clothing fragments were clearly not modern military issue.
The bodies were referred to Indian authorities. Initial estimates suggested the remains were medieval, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 years old.
In the 1950s and 1960s, Indian physical anthropologists conducted the first systematic examination of the skeletal remains. They confirmed the medieval dating and noted the presence of wooden artifacts, iron rings, leather slippers, and bamboo staffs, consistent with a large group of pilgrims or travelers on a religious journey.
The high-altitude route near Roopkund is part of an ancient pilgrimage path to the shrine of Nanda Devi, the goddess of the Himalayas. Large groups have walked this route for centuries.
Radiocarbon dating in the 1990s placed the majority of the remains at approximately AD 800, the early medieval period.
But the dating was not the most disturbing finding. The most disturbing finding was the wounds.
Every skull examined showed the same pattern of damage, a single depressed fracture on the top or back of the head, the same size, the same shape, delivered from above.
The skull fractures at Roopkund are unlike any wound caused by a fall, a rock slide, or hand-to-hand combat. A fall produces irregular fractures, multiple points of impact, different angles, inconsistent shapes. A rock slide produces crushing damage across multiple bones. Combat produces cuts, slashes, and defensive wounds on the arms and hands. The Roopkund wounds are none of these. They are round, depressed fractures, approximately the size of a cricket ball, located on the crown or the back of the skull, 1 per individual, delivered from directly above.
There are no defensive wounds on the arm bones, no fractures on the hands or forearms that would indicate the victims tried to protect themselves.
This pattern is consistent with a single scenario: objects falling vertically from above, striking people who had no warning and no time to react. The leading theory, and the one that has held up best against physical evidence, is a catastrophic hailstorm.
The Himalayas generate some of the most violent hailstorms on Earth. In narrow mountain passes where there is no shelter and no escape route, hailstones the size of cricket balls have been recorded. At 5,000 meters elevation, caught in a pass with no cover, a group of travelers would have no protection.
The wounds fit. The location fits. The absence of defensive injuries fits.
The hailstorm theory is compelling, but the 2019 DNA analysis made it significantly more complicated.
A team led by Aya Doan Harney of Harvard Medical School published a genetic study of 38 individuals from Roopkund in the journal Nature Communications. The results were unexpected.
The skeletons were not all from the same group. They were not all from the same time period, and they were not all from the same part of the world.
The majority, approximately 23 individuals, showed ancestry consistent with South Asia. They were likely pilgrims from the Indian subcontinent, consistent with the known religious route. But a significant minority, approximately 14 individuals, showed ancestry consistent with the Eastern Mediterranean. Specifically, they matched genetic profiles from Crete and Western Greece. These Mediterranean individuals had not traveled to Roopkund as part of the South Asian group. Genetically, they were distinct. The DNA analysis suggested they may have arrived at the lake in a different event, possibly centuries apart. How did people from the Eastern Mediterranean end up dying on a Himalayan mountaintop at 5,000 meters elevation, in the same lake as South Asian pilgrims, bearing the same type of wound on their skulls? The hailstorm theory explains the wounds. It does not explain why two genetically distinct groups from opposite ends of the ancient world died in the same small lake. Roopkund presents a layered mystery, and each layer resolved by science reveals another layer beneath it. The wounds were solved. Hailstorm, most likely. The dating was solved. Approximately AD 800 for the majority. The identity of some individuals was partially solved. South Asian pilgrims on a known religious route. But the Mediterranean individuals remain unexplained. No historical record documents a group of Greeks or Cretans traveling to the Himalayan highlands in the medieval period. No trade route connected the Eastern Mediterranean directly to this specific mountain pass. Were they travelers on a different route, merchants or explorers who reached the Himalayas through Central Asia? Were they soldiers? Were they part of a diplomatic mission to a South Asian court? The lake at Roopkund freezes and thaws every year. Each summer, more bones surface as the glacier shifts. Each year, the site gives up a little more of what it has held for over 1,000 years. But the question the DNA study posed in 2019 has not been answered. Why were people from the Mediterranean coast dying on a Himalayan mountaintop in the same lake, bearing the same wounds as pilgrims from India? The bones are there. The cause of death is understood. The people themselves remain, in the most essential way, completely unknown. 4 stories, 4 different oceans and mountain ranges, 4 different centuries, and yet a single thread runs through all of them. In each case, the physical evidence survived. The Sarah Joe's hull was there, registration numbers intact, 2,300 miles from where it vanished. Scott Moorman's bones were there, in a hand-dug grave marked with coral stones. The Marlborough's iron hull, if the accounts are accurate, was still floating after 23 years, carrying its crew of skeletons through the waters south of Cape Horn. Pavlopetri's walls were there, in 3 meters of water, visible from the surface, for 5,000 years. Roopkund's dead were there, frozen in a glacial lake, their skull fractures preserved in perfect detail, their DNA still readable after 12 centuries. The evidence survived. The explanation did not. We know someone buried Scott Moorman on Taongi Atoll. We do not know who. We know Pavlopetri was a functioning city for 2,000 years. We do not know what destroyed it. We know the people at Roopkund died from impacts to the top of the skull. We do not know why people from the eastern Mediterranean were on that mountain at all.
These are not cases where the evidence was lost. These are cases where the evidence is present, intact, and examinable, and still does not yield a complete answer.
Scott Moorman's grave had coral stones placed on top of it. That required a human being with hands and intention standing on that atoll at some point between 1979 and 1988.
That person knows what happened. They have never said.